Thank you for joining us at the Roundtable.
Brought to you by Community Education Arts, a nonprofit organization based in Noblesville, Indiana.
I'm Alice Cavanis-Gober, president of CEArts.
And I'm Sarah E. Morin, secretary of CEArts. Let's sit down at the Roundtable. I'd like to remind you a little bit about our NICE project. Our NICE project is always based upon classic literature. There's always going to be unavoidable issues that come with the study of literature, with intolerance, prejudice, discrimination, racism, gender bias, domestic abuse, as well as problematic social inequalities due to the class systems and patriarchal dominance. Our project's goals are to breathe new life into the classics by encouraging critical thinking, in-depth discussions of themes and issues in the works selected, and to invite you to experiment with your creativity. With these goals in mind, we'll do our best to discuss any unpleasant and discomforting aspects of our book choices, with understanding the cultural context of the times in which they were written and the periods in which the stories are set, and a consciousness of how these books relate to today. The books we're studying this year are Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell, Dracula by Bram Stoker, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte.
To further our little recap a little bit, we've already discussed racism, prejudice, intolerance, and discrimination in all four of our selected books, and we've looked at structure and its impact in each book. The main thing to take away from it is that, at least one of the main things, is that Bertha, even though she's virtually invisible for most of the book, has a huge impact on the story and all the other characters. Mm-hmm. And she, eventually, we realize that, at least in Rochester's mind, Jane is such a contrast mm-hmm. to Bertha. And his attraction to Jane makes a lot more sense, because at first you're like, oh my God, Jane is so much younger than this guy, and they have nothing in common. But then when you start to understand more and more and more about his life and his experience from his point of view of Bertha, mm-hmm. you can see where in Jane, he sees this opportunity, this chance to recapture part of his youth, his mm-hmm. youthful married years, if you will, that were destroyed by Bertha. He feels like even at his older age, he can sort of reinvent that time of his life, if you will, with Jane. So Bertha plays a very important part in how Jane and Rochester's romance and life together evolves, I think.
I think that's very true. I think, without Bertha, I think you're right that the appeal of, he describes her as all that is sanity. Mm-hmm. She really likes that practical rootedness to her. Yeah. And I don't think that, 20, 15 years before that those same qualities would have appealed to him in a romantic way.
No, it would have just come across as a creepy middle-aged man going after a very young girl who was in his household in a subservient position, like you alluded to earlier in our discussion. Mm-hmm. The Me Too movement would have been, hey, mm-hmm. that's not cool. So we do get a broader perspective of Rochester through Bertha, and I mm-hmm. think that's really interesting, especially how the book ends, and after Bertha has destroyed everything, and I'm trying not to give spoilers, but this book's been around for a long time. But when Jane and Rochester finally do end up together, Bertha played a huge role in that too. I mean, it wouldn't have been possible had she not done the crazy stuff she did. And by that time, her craziness, I do believe, is she's at whatever wit's end she had left, whether she was driven to be insane or she just was insane. By her final acts, she is acting insanely. One could say, I get it, I understand why, she was kind of justified, but still very extreme behavior and destructive behavior. And but it does lead to the path of relationship fulfillment for Rochester and Jane, or Rochester and Jane. So again, so much, so much.
Right. And I think we also just for sure need to touch on the fact that this is 2020. It's the year of the pandemic.
Yes.
It's the year of isolation. And I know that that's been something that you've been pondering deeply. Do you want to share your thoughts on that?
I think all 4 of our books this year hit home on that level for me personally, very deeply. And I think we talked about some things in earlier podcast episodes about some of my experiences that make that isolation, like my health problems, when we talked about Beth in Little Women and her dying, and we talked about my childhood health problems and my health problems today and everything. So we've covered that a lot, but I do feel like, my isolation this past year and going forward is virtually absolute. I mean, I'm living in the house with my husband, and we keep at least 6 feet apart at all times. And he goes to work and comes home every day. And I've told you he has this routine of, disinfecting everything he touches and putting his clothes in the washing machine right away and showering right away before we are even in the 2 rooms apart. I mean, we're so apart. And this is because of my health problems. My doctors have told me if I get COVID-19, it will most likely, without doubt, I'm trying to be nice, but it'll kill me. And so I have to be protected at all times. And so, that means I haven't been out of my house very often, because where am I going to go? What am I going to do? Go for a drive? Okay. I've done that a couple times. It's not really fulfilling, I've spent in the warmer weather, I was able to spend some time outside, masked, gloved, socially distant apart from, my grandson and my daughter and her husband and my son. But that's it. I mean, I've not seen or been around people at all. And this started in mid-March of 2020, and it's now the end of December. And going forward, I will be continuing to do this even when vaccine is available for me, because, people in my health situation will not be safe even with a vaccine until 70% of the entire country's population has achieved a level of immunity. So I'm in isolation for the long haul. And thank God for Zoom and Sarah E. because you keep me going. But our 4 books, each of our 4 books in several different layered ways deals with isolation. And so this year, I think I noticed those elements more than I ever have in the past readings of these books. And all of these books I've read before this year many, many times, as we've talked about, from childhood on. So that was a very strange experience for me to read these books this year through this lens of COVID-19 isolation. Sometimes I just had to put the books down because I couldn't take it. I was just like, I can't think about this. It's too depressing. I cannot imagine that it's going to be, depending on what part of the year I'm remembering, it's going to be another 6 months, another year and a half, and however long it's going to be before I actually can physically hug my daughter or my son or my husband. I mean, it's like, I don't remember the last time we hugged, it's been a long time. I might have to edit some of this out, but, but it's just that idea of how long will it be? That's kind of sad and depressing. And maybe someone's going to end up locking me up in an attic, but you know what I mean? That COVID-19 isolation is really relatable, when you're reading these books. And that I didn't expect that when we chose them, because when we chose these books, we didn't really have COVID-19 slapping us in the face yet, So it's been a thing, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. And you talking through that makes me think that Bertha being isolated, that is not her choice at all.
Right.
Grace Poole, however,
yes,
it is out of necessity, like a lot of us are choosing out of necessity to isolate ourselves.
Mhm.
A lot of us are stuck with one or two other people in a small space, and we're only coming out periodically like Grace Poole to go, get our food and come back up.
Right.
Some people, the isolation like Grace Poole may drive us to drink or other different, coping mechanisms, which may not be the healthiest. It makes me kind of now suddenly look at Grace Poole as a COVID-19 person familiar to us.
She could also be considered a healthcare hero. I mean, yes, she's getting paid. She has room and board, whatever. I mean, Rochester, she's an employee of Rochester's, right? But her job is to be in isolation with this crazy woman or outside the door of the room of the crazy person. I mean, she's not free to roam around as much as the other inhabitants of Rochester's household.
Right.
He has a very limited existence, and it is in no small part got to be a mirror of the frustration of the modern day caregiver. I mean, I know people, and myself included, who have cared for elderly parents who, for many different reasons, whether it's dementia or Alzheimer's or just other medical conditions that have caused a deterioration in their mental capacities or their behavior changes, whatever. It is grueling to be a caregiver in your home, an unpaid family caregiver, okay? Grace Poole, she may be paid, but she is in that home, and her job is grueling. And it's physically taxing because she's dealing with a mad woman who lashes out physically a lot. So, she is in charge of the restraints of Bertha. She is in charge of feeding her, and Bertha clearly is unkempt. She's got raggedy hair, and bathing her is probably a huge issue, hygiene, feeding. I mean, everything about this situation is horrifying, right? And Grace Poole is the caregiver for all that. So in some ways we can almost say she's like a healthcare, hero in the COVID-19 era. But
Right. And yeah, and it occurs to me now too that I always kind of viewed Grace Poole as being a neglectful caregiver.
yes.
But now with a little bit more life experience, she had no backup. 24 hours, 7 days a week. Of course she was going to fall asleep sometime.
Not described as a young woman herself. Okay. And as we age, we get less strong physically, and turning to alcohol. I think if I were her, I mean, again, let's walk a mile in someone's shoes. I'd probably be a flat out drunk too. I mean, goodness. So, but yeah, this sense of isolation that we're experiencing, many of us are experiencing in COVID-19, and what we see in our 4 books, I think we definitely have some similarities there. And you can certainly it's easier in the global pandemic scenario of isolation to kind of empathetically put yourself in the situation of some of these characters. For example, even in Gone with the Wind, when they make it back to Tara after the burning of Atlanta, that's a very isolated time period in the book. Nobody's visiting, nobody's coming and going. And then suddenly there's that Yankee deserter who comes to rob and potentially rape somebody, and that's a very frightening thing. There have been times when I've been alone in the house and, I'm like, okay, I am completely alone in this house. I mean, there's nobody here but me. And you hear on the news about, desperate people in the way the economy's tanked and everything. Desperate people are breaking into cars and breaking into homes. And I've given into fear in the middle of the night sometimes when I don't really need to, but, I have. It's just it's kind of like your situation can make you feel a little unstable in your brain, So I think whether it's Jonathan at Dracula's castle, or, Scarlett at Tara after the burning of Atlanta, or, Joe alone in New York after Beth has died, or Bertha in the attic, or Jane in the red room, or whatever, you can really empathize with these isolating scenarios in our 4 books far easier and more deeply than, at least for me, than I ever did in the past reading these books. And it's because of COVID-19. I mean, I've told you before, it's like a roller coaster. Some days I'm fine, and some days I'm like, oh no, I'm going insane, so.
Yeah, no, those are all excellent points, Alice.
Join us next time as we continue our recap discussion for the 6th annual NICE project. This has been At the Round Table with Alice
And Sarah E.
of Community Education Arts.
Our nonprofit organization is based in Noblesville, Indiana. You can find us online at CEArts.org. We'd like to thank James Weston for writing our intro music and for his technical savvy.
Join us next time
At the Round Table.